concentrated meetings because we know your time is valuable and we want to make the best use of that. And everyone is tired. We've already had church and all those things. So first off, I'd like to introduce, yes, energize. First thing I'd like to introduce is Erin Pineda. She is our controller, an excellent financial mind, and she's going to tell you everything you could possibly know about our financial state and how our financials are developed and how seriously we take this process. So I welcome Erin.
Hi, everybody. I said to Walter, I think it was Walter, when I first came in today to the forum, I thought, this is starting to feel like my own classroom a little bit. So I've been up here a few times now, and I'm sure you'll see more of me. I think that doing these quarterly town halls has been positive, at least from my perspective. I feel like I'm getting opportunities to meet people in the community, as well as give folks a little bit of a window, a view into what we are doing that may be a little bit differently than how All Saints has done some things in the operation side in the past. So with that, I'll go ahead and take it away. So the topics that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to try to be relatively brief just so that we have plenty of time for questions. The topics are, we're going to go over the Q1 operating results for the financial results. We are going to have a very brief summary of where we are in the 2024 giving and pledge process. We are going to look at the 2024 proposed budget, very summarized version of that, and also talk about some of the inputs to the 3-year operating plan that is being developed now, and then have time for questions. So first, the first quarter financial summary. So in the first quarter of 2024, we had some, let's call them highlights, maybe a couple of lowlights. Operating income is primarily made up of pledge and other types of giving. Pledge income was somewhat less than for the first quarter than it had been last year. So it was $102,000 below budget and $65,000 behind last year. Prepaid pledges are a significant factor in this. Last year we had about $300,000 of prepaid pledges. That means people who paid their 2024 pledges in advance back in 2023, or actually in that case, 2023 pledges in 2022. We had significantly less of that this year. The stock market can be a factor in that, so it doesn't always mean people are not feeling as generous. So it's not necessarily something to worry about if those same folks who have made significant pledges and who do have still made those pledges for 2024, and that is the case. They just didn't choose to pay it in advance. The operating expenses for the first quarter are under budget by about $26,000. And one of the things that's a main factor is we retained in the proposed budget for this year the CYF, the Children, Youth, and Family kind of associate position that was held by Aaron Martinez last year. And we've been trying to fill that position with a little bit of a variety of part-time positions, having trouble doing that. So we retained that in the budget because the CYF staffing was in flux. And as I'm sure many of you already know, Nina Shearer, our CYF director, had to step down about a month ago. And so right now we're in even more of a significant transition moment with our CYF staffing, but we have set aside funds in the proposed budget to deal with that. Also, at the end of 2023, we actually received an undesignated bequest from somebody who had previously indicated that they were interested in helping fund Safe Haven. And so Safe Haven has been funded to the tune of $100,000, which is significant because for the last couple of years, we've been carrying an unfunded balance for the ongoing security costs for Safe Haven. And so we were able to more than cure that. It had been about $40,000 that we were sort of in the red. And so we were able to cure that and have funding for Safe Haven for the next several years. And one of the things about Safe Haven is we're moving to incorporating Safe Haven into the operating budget. Safe Haven right now is an example of how many of our ministries are not in the operating budget because they are directly funded by other sources and specific giving. And so we're going to be working on getting Safe Haven incorporated in the operating budget because obviously it's such an active and consistently going on part of our ministries. Probably most of you already know that the markets were pretty favorable across the country in first quarter of this year, and so we continue to see investment gains on our endowed funds. Investment gains of about $160,000. Obviously, those would be unrealized for the most part because we're not buying and selling, more than we need to be, and that helps us actually recover from the losses that really most everybody took in 2022. So we're pretty nearly back to 100% of where we had been before the stock market had its volatility in 2022. And then finally, last year and in the prior year, the vestry had, adopted a $3.1 million deferred maintenance project. And as you know, the scaffolding has been on the rectory, on the office building for some time. And so it's good to see that's down now. But up through March of this year, about $435,000 of that $3.1 million was spent just in that one quarter on some of those projects. So this is the summarized actual versus the proposed budget for 2024 for the first quarter. And what you can see here is that what we collected was $622,000 in pledge, plate, and other giving versus having budgeted for $719,000. Endowment draw is just about on track, as one would expect. And as I indicated, we were under budget on expenses, primarily in the area of personnel. One of the things to know is that we are attempting to record the budget on a month-by-month basis based on how income came in the subsequent year. And so, as I said, we're having a little bit of different trends happening in this first quarter. And so we're not entirely surprised, really not surprised at all, that we're showing that we're under budget in pledge income. Really, just as I said, that difference in prepaid pledges more than makes up for the about $100,000 variance that we're seeing so far in this first quarter. The other thing to note is on the bottom line, net operating losses. We do have a $460,000 net operating loss for the first quarter, but that's versus a $362,000 that we had projected to have for the quarter. And what I want you to know, and we're going to look at this on the next slide, is that All Saints has a little bit of a different trend line in terms of cash flow and the way income comes in. So in the church environment, our expenses are pretty much the same month in and month out. There's not a lot of variation. But the income tends to trend, from one month to the next could be dramatically different. And that any time that our expenses are more than our income, we have an operating loss for that period. Anytime that our income is more than expenses, we would have a net operating income or a surplus. We know, and we show that in the projected budget, that we know that we're going to have less income in the first quarter than we're going to have expenses. We planned for that. We expect that all year for the first 3 quarters, actually, of the year. And that's where All Saints varies somewhat from most other churches. So this slide, I want to give just a moment to explain what this slide is showing. This is talking about that same concept of net operating losses in terms of cash flow. So when we're having more expenses than income, obviously our cash is reducing over time. And one of the questions that the vestry is facing this year as we look at a deficit budget for 2024 is how much runway do we have? Meaning, how long of a time can we manage to have less income than we do expenses? So what this slide is showing you on the blue line is that All Saints has about $1.1 million in operating cash at the beginning of this year. And we know from prior year trends that we pick up a great deal of income in the fourth quarter. And that's what creates that kind of reverse check mark shape of the graph. We sort of are losing cash, losing money all year long. We get to the fourth quarter and it ticks up because we're bringing in more money around the holidays than we are spending. So that's how the trend line works at All Saints. And what I'm showing you by comparison here with the gray line is that a large number of most churches, I would say, follow closer to an S-shaped curve or cycle over the course of the year, where income stays relatively high, potentially matching or exceeding expenses kind of up through Easter. And then there's what I refer to as the long, slow slide as we go through the summer and the early fall. And then same as All Saints ticks up as nearer we get to Christmas. And if you have a balanced budget, then as this gray line shows you, your cash at the beginning of the year would be about the same as it was at the end of the year, right? And so that's kind of one significant factor is what we're trying to achieve by balancing the budget. The other thing, going back to the blue line in regard to All Saints, is again to recognize that right now we have a fairly substantial proposed deficit budget, and what that means is that we are depleting the cash reserves that we have on hand, specifically for operating purposes. I do want to emphasize, especially because if you look at the blue line right above where it says July and August, it looks like, oh my gosh, we'll almost be out of cash. This isn't all of the cash we have. This is just operating reserves. So we have restricted funds and endowed funds that have cash that's not available for operating purposes, but is still maintained. And so we're not in danger of completely running out of cash. But it is a factor at play in regard to how much of a deficit in any year we can manage through knowing that we have this trend line. And I can come back to this graph too later if there's questions about it. Okay, so just a quick giving update. Pretend I'm Sarah for just this next couple of slides. Okay, so income trends that we have seen so far this year, or so far actually the last couple of years. Pledge income and the number of pledging households, and I'm going to show this in table form in just a couple of slides, dropped substantially during the COVID-19 shutdown. And really the giving has remained relatively flat. We have continued to lose both pledging households and our income has been reducing, but not at the same rate as we saw in 2020 and 2021. Plate income right now is returning to the 2018-2019 levels. And so last time we did one of these town halls, and I believe that the PowerPoint is available online, we had a slide where we showed plate, bequests, all different kind of income sources, and the graph over multiple years of kind of what the trend line has looked like for those different sources. And plate has sort of dipped during COVID and has come back up to the same levels as pre-COVID. Online giving is an area that has had both kind of natural COVID, you know, we all went through the COVID shutdown, all churches did, and we're trying to get folks to online giving. You'd think online giving would have ticked up during COVID. It really didn't. And then in 2022, we had some transitional elements in the giving department that meant that some of the, I guess we'll say, management of the giving systems meant that we didn't necessarily connect and touch base in a timely fashion with all of the folks who were doing online giving. So we're actually having to kind of reboot online giving to a certain extent. And the reason maybe if you're an online giver, you haven't felt that or seen that, maybe to the extent that you would think since I'm talking about it, is that we're working on getting a new church management system. Church management software is like a customer relations management system, but specifically for churches. And it incorporates both giving and member integration, member incorporation elements to it. And it is going to mean that the online giving platforms that some of you are used to, using are going to change. And so just sort of to give you that forewarning, we're likely to see that shift this summer. And the reason we're making the shift is that the software that we have right now really was probably best in class about 10 years ago, but as the world has moved more and more into the cloud and more online, it's a bit of a legacy product. So the systems that we're considering are going to hopefully make giving a lot easier and incorporate more easily with our website, which is also a plus. So keep an eye out about that. Donors are often interested in making restricted gifts, right? Gifts that are specific to the music program or specific to children, youth, and family, or as I was saying, Safe Haven as an example. And not all of those gifts will make them move themselves into the operating budget. We maintain about 50 designated and restricted funds that are outside of the operating budget. And so sometimes those restricted gifts benefit those programs directly, and they have a reduction potential impact on the operating income if somebody is replacing their operating support with their restricted support. So that's just something to keep in mind. One of the things that we're working on is some grant funding now. And again, one of the things about grant funding is that often grants are restricted to a specific program, but we can ask for a certain amount of general and administrative costs to be included in the grant. So generally speaking, if we've got new grants, and I've got one to talk about in just a moment, only a small portion of that grant funding is going to make it into the operating budget, because most of it is going to go to fund a new program or something that's not in the operating budget. And then finally, I know that we've talked before about other kinds of income, and we're needing to diversify our income streams. So one of the things that's hard about churches as we go through fundraising efforts, so often we're like going back to the same people over and over and over again and making asks. And so we're looking at non-member sources of income and diversifying our assets. So parking, space renters, and filming are the three pieces of that are, let's consider, launched and off the ground and have returned now post-COVID as sources of income. Parking specifically has reached pre-COVID levels, and there was some uncertainty about that. So it looks to be on, returning that way. I said I was going to be short, not so long-winded, but that's not my nature. Okay, so anyway. So projected income, pledge income. I put the date on here. I just got this information from Sarah. One of the things that we're going to talk about here down the road, so try to hold this number in your head. This $2.94 million is the number that we have at the bottom of this slide, is the number we have in the proposed budget for what we expect to get in pledges in 2024. If you go from the bottom and you go back up to the top, you can see that as of the beginning, or as of this past week, we have pledge commitments of 2.608. And then in addition to that, the additional anticipated pledges is $200,000. And then the additional offering, previously treated as pledge, and I'm going to explain this in just one second, is $150,000. And that we're projecting to get us to over the 2.94 number. The reason we're calling out the offering component of this is that since Sarah came aboard last May, we've been working together, the giving and the accounting departments, on streamlining and clarifying the classification of income. So we previously didn't have a category called miscellaneous offering, general offering, other offering, however you might, we're just choosing offering at the moment. Essentially what offering is it's not pledge, because it is not it's not money that's being given in relation to a commitment that was made, whether verbal or in writing. And it's not plate in that it was not received in the service, but it's some other kind of general giving. So here's what is changing behind the scenes. This is your little see the wizard kind of situation. So what has happened historically in the giving system at All Saints is that the envelope numbers were used to assert whether or not somebody was giving pledge. So if you had an envelope number in a certain range of envelope numbers, then the people who were inputting the giving would say, oh, your gift is pledge, whether or not you had made a pledge for that particular year. What we're trying to encourage now is for people to be willing to make the particular commitment of making a pledge, willing to spend the time with yourself and your family to think about what kind of commitment you are able to make in a particular year to All Saints, and to share that commitment with the church. And and when you give against that kind of a commitment being made, we're going to now call that pledge. When somebody gives in the services, but they don't have a pledge, that's treated as plate. If somebody gives online and doesn't have a pledge, or gives, like mails in from their bank, has a check mailed in from their bank, those kinds of things, or gives in some other manner, then those are going to be considered offering. What we expect to do, sooner rather than later, maybe as soon as the next town hall, is actually start collapsing our reporting on these three categories, so as not to be more confusing than necessary, because what really matters from a big picture, 30,000 foot level, is how much support are we getting, how much general support is our operating getting from the community. What matters behind the scenes, and this is where Sarah and I kind of get in the weeds together, is we want to make sure that we're engaging people as well as that we can. So one of the things that I know that Sarah and the Giving Committee have talked about recently is those people who are giving regularly and are not, but have not made a pledge, have they been asked directly, could we call your continuing support a pledge? Or have they been asked, when we see that kind of recurring giving, non-pledge giving happening, and we're in the pledge campaign, are we reaching specifically out to those folks and saying, we see that you have recurring giving, can we depend on you continuing that next year? Can we depend on you raising? Could you do more? And so what happens sometimes, I think, is that we get focused on the pledge campaign and we forget to make the asks, the same asks we're making of pledgers, of folks who are not pledgers. Does that make sense? This is not my area, so best I can do without Sarah. But that's part of the kind of behind the scenes process that we're working on now to both clarify where money is coming from and have really clear instruction for the people who are actually doing the processing. So that's kind of what's going on. You might see something in your quarterly giving statement that looks different as well. So this is kind of your PSA about where that's coming from. Okay, so going back to specifically the numbers, this gives you a little bit of the 5-year trend of how the giving has been going on. And this is similar to what we shared in February. And what I want to emphasize actually is 2022. Where are we? 2022, kind of right in the middle. And 2022, at the end of 2022 was the year we started shifting to this new model. We hadn't specifically decided to call it offering, but the idea of pledge versus non-pledge, we were starting to introduce that starting in 2022. So if you look at 2021 non-pledge regular support, kind of in the middle of your screen, it's about 250,000, and then it bumps way up in 2022, and then we're kind of figuring things out in 2023. The reason it bumped way up in 2022 is special gifts, and that's a whole other category of things that we are clarifying now. But also in 2022, there were some of the bequests that came in that were treated as operating income. And as a matter of policy change in 2023, we no longer treat bequests, generally speaking, as operating income. Moving on to Q1 2024 versus Q1 2023. Again, this is just another way for us to think about, or a way to see how the offering or how the giving is playing out year by year. Offering, as I said, was not a category we were using before this year, so that's why we have none of that in 23, but accumulated some in 24. Much of what's accumulated is online giving. Plate you see is running a little bit light, but not really in any significant amount. Also recall that in this year, Easter was at the end of March, and Easter is actually classified in another category outside of this grouping. Easter was giving was a little bit higher this year than last year. Online giving, okay, separate from offering, online giving was a little bit down, and again, that I think is going to recover over the course of the year with the work that we're doing on. Special gifts, we have decided, starting this year, are general operating giving where the individual gift is more than $5,000. Neither Sarah nor I had a clear understanding of how special gifts were classified in the past. And special gifts are a big piece of that reverse check mark graph that I was showing you earlier, because we get massive amounts of special gifts in at All Saints at Christmas time. Just really significant giving in December. And so a lot of that gets classified as special gifts. And we'll see those numbers not so much tick up probably until a year from February when we start reporting out the end of 2024, and you'll be able to see how significant it is at the end of the year. Bequests, again, are not generally being treated as operating income, but you can see how those are coming in now. And then memorials as well, we're classifying as outside of the operating budget and leaving it up to vestry to decide what they want to do with memorial gifts. So that's another change we're making. What you can see in total is year over year, we're not that far off pace in terms of non-pledge giving, only about $10,000. Okay, we're moving on. Everybody take a deep breath. Blow right into the microphone. I'm obviously a professional. Okay, so last section. So 2024 budget and the 3-year plan update. So although Al said I was going to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about the accounting at All Saints, I'm happy to do that. But this one-page summary landscape on-a-screen budget, is something that the vestry looks at, and it fills one page with much smaller numbers, and that page is summarized from 14 pages of accounts. You get what I'm saying? So we're trying to give you as much as we can at a level that keeps our conversation at the big picture, right? What's happening at All Saints, what's material to our operations and how we're doing. And so hopefully the summarized level is helpful, but if you want to dig down, we can provide more information to anyone who's interested in that outside of the presentation. The first thing I want to highlight is the red line in the 2022 and 2023 actual columns. The red line is to indicate or to highlight for you that the main reason that we're expecting a fairly significant deficit budget this year is that this is the first year we don't have COVID-19 federal support. So we've shared this before, but in 2023 we were able to apply for and get almost $600,000 in employee retention tax credits, and that essentially carried us through last year, if you want to put it that way. It meant that there were some decisions that didn't have to be made on the fly last year. That was really a positive thing from my perspective, because at this time last year, I was still trying to catch the financial reporting up. So had we been having to try to make the operating plan that we're working on this year, last year when we did not have up-to-date financial information, it would have been that much harder. And so that was the positive thing about having those funds. I also want to share that when Vestry adopted the 2023 budget, I remember very specifically that the vestry understood that we were relying on a non-operating source of COVID support that was not going to continue. And so I want to make sure that folks understand, like, the deficit didn't come out of nowhere. You know, we knew that the budget was being balanced with non-operating support and non-recurring sources of money. It was a matter of not only then trying to figure out how to make the changes that need to be made while living into our values, continuing to live into our values, as well as continue to experience what return out of COVID shutdown actually felt like. I would tell you with all the churches I work with, it really wasn't until 2023 where we felt like we were really back to in-person activities. And I say that from my vantage point, which is often behind a computer screen, looking at transactions and money being spent, et cetera. So that's what I would say is how that felt to me. So kind of not until the end of 23 could we really see, you know, where we were. Another thing that we didn't have until middle last year was a clear sense of exactly how much money we had in unrestricted reserves. So how much cash were we sitting, you know, do we have in hand that wasn't otherwise like for a restricted program or a designated program or for endowment, that sort of thing. And we've been able to carve out that number with certainty now, and that gives vestry a lot more ability to interpret our current operations, as well as sort of see how the long-term impact of changes would be. And the term that I've been using is how much runway do we have? So if we are suffering deficit budgets now, how long do we have to cure that? You know, based primarily on what is the least amount of money we're comfortable having on hand as a reserve, as a rainy day fund. So that's part of the conversation that vestry has been experiencing these last months. You'll see in the kind of peach color 2024 proposed budget that in the top part of the slide, we're showing pledge and other giving. And I subtotaled all of that so that you could see that what we're essentially saying is that we're expecting giving to be about flat. A little bit less than 2023, a little bit more than 22, right? So we're seeking to have that income remain flat. The other sources of income are why we're seeing a deficit, and as I said, the COVID support, and then endowment draw actually is impacted by the deferred maintenance project that we're just in the backside of, because some of the funds that were used for that project came out of the quasi-endowment, and normally that endowment is invested and we draw 5% a year into the operating budget from that. So those funds are not available anymore. Going down to the bottom of the expenses, the diocesan assessment is based on our operating results from 2 years past. So what we know is that as we recover from COVID and continue to spend, or it goes up. If we reduce our expenses, it goes down, but with a 2-year delay, right? So for now, we're seeing, as I said, 2022, 23, as compared to prior, we were recovering, we're coming out of COVID, we were re-engaging some of our activities that had been, you know, on pause maybe. And so we're seeing that diocesan assessment going up. In addition, the diocese is now requiring the assessment that used to be at 10% to be at 12% of our operating, and we have committed to the diocese over 3 years to move from 10% to 12%. So we've made that commitment to the diocese. Other than that, you'll notice in the personnel and non-personnel expense areas, we're projecting to try to reduce expenses, and you can imagine that doesn't just happen, right? So cost of living, inflationary pressures on everything, you know, cause expenses normally to climb from the 2 to 5% range every year just to keep business as usual. And so one of the things we're looking at this year is how to reduce some of our expenses. And we've started to do much of that. And in the last couple of years, we've done things that helped build some efficiencies in the non-personnel area. So for example, we changed our payroll service provider, which sounds like a small thing, but it saved us $15,000 a year. So as an example, right now, Nader, our IT director, is working on a conversion of the phone systems that we're expecting to save us $10,000 a year. That doesn't get us out of a $500,000 deficit, obviously. Those are sort of too small of changes, but every little bit helps. And so everyone's sort of focusing in on how to do things more efficiently where we can. So through these last years, as I said, we've been kind of cleaning up the financials, getting clearer about some of our key metrics, things like how much money do we have in the bank to sustain a deficit budget for a year or 2 or 3. And there's also been work that much of the community has been engaged in regard to setting strategic goals. And so I've taken some of the information from the vestry's resources about the foundational goals and All Saints values. We'll just visit those for a second. And then I'll talk just really briefly about the North Star goals that were adopted by vestry last year that are strategic priorities that are being set. In addition, in order to invest in All Saints' future, we are working on expanding the collaborative model, engaging both staff and volunteers across all ministries in order to work collaboratively to build both efficiencies and effectiveness. And we are also seeking congregational engagement in program planning and execution. So that is part and parcel with the collaborative model in terms of engaging as many voices as possible, which I kind of think of as the All Saints way, to get everybody's information, and it obviously helps with buy-in as well if you have to make changes. The other thing that's part of that is we're building a supervisory structure, or should we say, maybe not building, but clarifying and formalizing the supervisory structure that essentially takes the mid-level management part of the staffing and helps there be clarity of expectation and accountability around having that role. What does that role mean in terms of their responsibilities to support the staff within their departments and their budgets? And then we're also focusing in our use of assets, knowing that between all of the deferred maintenance that we have on this property, we talked last time about we really don't have nearly as much endowment as we would like to have to draw from over the long term. We don't have a maintenance reserve. We talked about that last February as well. So there's a lot of different things that are outside of the operating plan, but have to do with the long-term future of the church and how do we secure that future by focusing the use of assets and making sure that we're clear about the direction that All Saints is going. So these are the foundational goals and values. Values, obviously, we are all familiar with. The foundational goals are on the Every Vestry agenda and have been set as determining the values, mission, and vision. And then I've also shown you the mission statement here that the vestry actually reads at the beginning of every vestry meeting. Addressing serious staffing capacity issues, which is a foundational goal identified in the past. Providing safe, welcoming space. That's part of the engagement of the deferred maintenance projects, right? Is that really trying to engage our spaces and make sure that that we're maximizing those spaces and making sure that they're up to snuff for what we need to do with them. And then inspiring congregational leadership and development. And that's the last foundational goal that I think that that probably speaks the most to what we're doing overall this year and in the coming 3 years, is really engaging overall congregational leadership. So I'm going to go also here briefly over the North Star goals. As noted there, this might be raise a hand. Has anybody, who here has seen the North Star goals before? Not very many of you. Okay, so I'm not really the spokesperson of the North Star goals. I'm gonna point at Tony, because he was the leader and the chair of the committee, and Terry, who both engaged the community in the development of the North Star goals. And so what I'm presenting, I guess, for many of you for the first time today is just to let you know what the vestry actually adopted last year. There was so much going on last summer, as I said, in part related to budget preparation and catching up the financials, as well as getting Sarah aboard and up to speed on everything. The Strategic Planning Implementation Committee has not been able to really start its work, but these are the goals that Vestry has adopted that we hope to be able to incorporate into a 3-year operating plan. So the first one is regarding belonging, accelerate All Saints flourishing as a beloved community of belonging. And I think of this goal, this is my own language, is church as community, where we're engaging interministry teams that bring together people together and grow programming that attracts new members. So we're engaging, it incorporates pastoral care, parish life, inclusion ministries, sort of all under an umbrella of making room for everybody here at All Saints and welcoming everybody. The second goal is strengthen our capacity and infrastructure for prophetic ministry and effective activism. And I've listed there some of the things that we are doing and working on right now to and try to engage this goal. There is a communications audit that was completed recently, and there's plans to figure out how to do that and to do the steps that are in that communications audit and improve communications, like overhauling the website, which is in the process now. As I said, implementing a new church management system, incorporating communication tools that are easy to use, integrated for efficiency, and promote All Saints values out into the community. And then as well as faith in action, right? All of the work that the Faith in Action and the Justice Ministries are doing to be church as a change agent, right, out in the community. And then finally, the third goal is to initiate a bold, comprehensive revitalization project that really, in part, addresses both church as a place that is safe for everyone to do ministry and be part of and bring community members into and use these facilities, but also a place of sanctuary for folks. And one of the things that I had sort of referenced is that we did get a security grant. And so it's a 3-year federal grant that we have received through the state that's specifically for religious institutions and improving security. And so I'm sure that there'll be more talk about that, and you'll be able to see some evidence of that going on in the next year or so. The collaborative model, if you're not familiar with how it works, is something that was introduced back in 2020, and it's how we are going to organize ministry, or how we are organizing ministry. So it was introduced back pre-pandemic, and the work paused and has been reinitiated over the last 2 years. The role out with staff has included the start of intentional culture workshops and to develop the mid-level management, like I was saying. And then the role of vestry, or rollout to vestry, has been that we've started to present the budget to vestry in these categories of expenses. So one of the things that I've been trying to contribute is just to say, this is how we're spending money, this is how our staff is allocated, and to allow vestry to reflect on, like, are we spending money in line with our mission and values? And then finally, we're building out the organization, one more thing, and clarifying roles and accountability. So behind the scenes, the personnel team has been hard at work this last 6 months or so, establishing job descriptions, really longer than that, a year and a half, establishing job descriptions and new employee handbook, and really formalizing some of the kind of institutional, organizational things that that we need to make sure that staff are both supported and we're able to hold staff accountable for the roles that they are in. Finally, I want to just suggest that all of these pieces are working together for us to build a 3-year and beyond operating plan that essentially gives us the idea of establishing our staff through rolling out this supervisory structure, which is in process right now, and continuing to implement and fully implement the collaborative model so that staff can be leaders with their congregational ministry partners to sort of lead these interministry teams. We'll engage interministry teams in teaching about the North Star goals, the foundational goals, and really asking staff and lay leaders to connect activities to the goals and strategy. So that's kind of the idea, is that in order to make sure that we can move out of, or really more importantly, make sure that we can be a place in the future that is continuing to attract members, we're wanting to engage all of these parts and make sure that everyone who's engaged in ministry also sort of knows what their piece is. And I think about one of the things that I've heard, I think from the presiding bishop's office, but certainly in my diocese, is as Episcopalians, sometimes we struggle with discipleship and really being that welcoming force that we want to be, that we know we need to be, and really engaging, really truly engaging folks and inviting them, personally inviting them to our community. We're fighting against, from my perspective, and this is me taking my finance hat on and my kind of Episcopalian, putting that hat more on. I think about that we're fighting sort of the commercialization of church, right? And the idea, like the kind of a retail service model. And I think I'm probably preaching to the choir, but in terms of who's here for this kind of a moment. But I think that's what we know we're seeing on the outside of these walls, and what we really are trying to do is be something different, right, than we're necessarily seeing in society. So knowing that church is not only here for us to be served, but to serve, and figuring out how we all specifically and individually can do that is part of what's going to be important for All Saints' success in the future. Now I invite Al to say a little bit more about where the vestry is at, but that's all I have for you. That was too long.
That's right. Close this down here. First off, thank you all for being here. I do want to say I know that I've met several of you, and I know that you are the people who have for years supported our church and our mission, and I personally much appreciate that. I think that's wonderful. First off, I want to talk about the obvious question is, how in the heck did we get here? Let's face it. So I was on the vestry last year, and I went through and I saw that we had the money that came in from COVID, and we all knew that that was a one-time thing. And we recognized at that time there would be this challenge this year. And here it is. The challenge is here. So I'd just like to give everyone just a little bit of background about this. Deficit spending is not something that's new for All Saints. This has happened for years. And why that happened was we always seemed to have pretty much a large reserve, and that it was being replenished on a regular basis. The one thing that has happened here this year is a couple of things. First off, we had $3 million in repairs that were needed. And those were repairs that were done because they had been ignored for decades. And I think, so many people, I know Phil Necker, Lonnie Shields, so many other people have been so wonderful in getting those repairs done, but water was coming in from everywhere. It was coming in from the roof. It was coming through the walls, through the windows. Wei Chung's music was being destroyed. The vestments that we've had for years, they were almost damaged. Our choir robes, we had to take them all home and rewash them so they wouldn't mildew because we had 2 inches of water sitting in the choir room. It was that desperate a situation that had to be addressed. There was no way to put it off. It had been put off for decades. So that's one thing that we need to, as a vestry and as a parish, I think we need to own that that's part of our heritage, and it's something we have a responsibility to finally change. And we have the capability to do that. One of the things, how this process has worked this year, normally our finance decisions, they go to the budget committee, they go to the finance committee. The finance committee has been diligently working on this for several months. And I'm sure you understand when we talk about these kind of numbers, they affect a lot of segments of our church. And that's a very, very difficult decision. And I do respect the need to be careful about that. We don't want to take a slash and burn approach at all. We want to take a conscious, measured approach where we can be compassionate to our staff and we can be good stewards of our resources that we have. Actually, when Mike asked me to do this job, I knew there was a deficit this year, and I knew what I was in for, and I knew what the vestry was in for, and I knew what you all were in for. And yet, that's not an easy task to take on, but I take that on because I feel I can be of service. And that's what I ask for all of you. And I know that you've done that in the past. I feel that I can be of service, and I can assist the people who are much smarter and much more capable than I to make these decisions, and I embrace that. When we come to finances, we always worry about the future of our church, and we say, oh, we know what's going to happen. And I think it's time for us to think about, yes, we've got some challenges here. What do we want the church to be? This is a wonderful time. All of a sudden, we have the biggest, I'm going to talk today about some of our biggest threats and our biggest opportunities that I see. And I think they're all contingent with this whole idea of how we plan our money and how we plan our mission in the church. I am going to talk about, actually, things that Aaron just brought up. For today, I'm going to talk about belonging. I'm going to talk about our history as activists as a church. And then I'm going to talk about our history and our position as a church of, let's say, spiritual sanctuary. So first off, when we talk about belonging, I'm really talking about the community. The money's short, and my experience with money short, people tend to get pretty daggone testy, right? Isn't that right? Think about your own home life. When money is short, temperatures rise, and we don't make the best decisions. My life was no different. We've all had personal financial reverses. The one thing that I found in my personal life, and I think it holds for the church, when the time came that I had to take a look at my personal finances and redo those, every time my life came out better. And it was simple because all of a sudden, all the extraneous stuff that I was spending money for that wasn't really important part of my values, I had to set that aside. I was forced to set that aside and determine what was really, really important to me. And I mean that every time my life actually improved, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it actually did. One concern that I have, and they'll talk about the concerns of the church, I see a sense of us having personal silos. And what I mean by that is some of us were lining up in different areas and we're backing certain things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as we don't allow it to divide us from our mission. And our mission right now is we really do need to pull together on this one. One of the concerns I have is I see a general interest in many of us, human nature, like we're challenged with the money. And so we want to have some sense of stability. And one of the big senses of stability is to gain some sense of power. Power over that money, power over our situation, power, unfortunately, maybe over other people. That's not so good. It's not necessarily a solution. It can be damaging, and especially if it is hurtful to all. We always have done best when we rally together. We don't have to agree on everything. I personally believe in a spirited debate. But when we all leave, we still leave as brothers and sisters in Christ and in love. I had a friend of mine, I'll just tell you about this. I had a friend, she was an addict. And I asked her one time, I said, "Oh, what was your drug of choice? Alcohol, cocaine, heroin, excessive food, whatever?" And she says, "Oh, no, it's really simple. My drug was M-O-R-E, more. No matter what I had, I was never satisfied, and I needed more. And I was driven, my life was driven, my whole life, I needed more." And I would posit to you as something to think about. Power can be that way. When we are threatened and we grab for power, we can intuitively just want more. And we can say, if I have more, things will be so much better. And trust me, it doesn't work. Didn't work for my addict friend, it won't work for us. Okay, I'm going to move on to, that's belonging. Activism. Basically, we've always functioned as, the church is kind of a change agent. That when we've done our best, we have gone out into the world and we've made impact in the world. And I know all of you can do this. The reason I'm saying this, I'm not scolding anyone. I'm encouraging you because I know, I've seen you do it. And I find it powerful. I've sometimes wondered, when we have a lot of money, do we accidentally fall into a habit of saying, "Oh, we can just pay the staff to do our good work for us"? Think about that. It's easy to do. That's fine. If they do those things and they do it on our behalf, that's wonderful. But we miss the joy of doing it ourselves. I always believe that we need to be personally active. One of the things I find with that is, too, it's easy when we have these challenges to find something to blame. So we can blame the economy. We can blame our political leaders. We can blame Mike. Sorry, Mike, you're on your own on this one. No, I'm teasing because I don't believe that it's that simple. In my work life, I've worked with a lot of bosses. And some of them were wonderful, wonderful, wonderful mentors. And some of them were absolute turkeys. And in that whole experience, did the organizations fall apart? No. It was easier when I dealt with really competent people, yes. But I always knew that somehow I had to step up, and my team had to step up. So those are the things that I saw there. But I really feel that one person never defines the success. Collectively, we define our success. One of my mentors, again, I've been blessed with wonderful mentors. One of my mentors once said, "Al, if you want to know the secret of success, it is this simple in life. When you're challenged with anything, everything's going bad, get up in the morning, walk into the bathroom, look into the mirror. The answer to 98% of your problems is right there in front of you in that mirror." And I do believe that. We have the capability. We don't need our leaders to do all this for us. They can assist us, definitely. We can do this, and we must. So that's activism. I'd like to talk briefly about sanctuary. And the sanctuary, in my mind, it's never about the building. The church isn't the building. We have wonderful, beautiful buildings, and we have to maintain them because we have a legacy that we're living there. But to me, church is about the experience. And I think about some of the challenges that we have now, and I know some of the challenges as an Episcopalian that I've dealt through and you have. I was in a very Anglican church in New York and also in Encino, and everyone was very adamant about having the altar against the wall. Sound familiar? You've heard this, right? And they were vehement that no way will we ever move that altar out. And I didn't really quite understand it. And I talked to Rob Voyle, who was at our conference, good friend. And I was saying, gosh, I don't understand that. And he said, yes, it's a simple view of the view of Christ. The altar against the wall is the transcendent Christ. And then the altar in the chancel is the Christ omnipresent. And both are valuable, and both are special. We also dealt with the inclusion of women. There's lots of things our church is going through. I think our church is going through stuff right now that's really easy for us to fix, and we need to get on them because they will divide us and keep us from our goal of hitting our financial goals as well. So we deal with, in our service right now, we have two things that are happening. One thing, we deal with the meditative side of our service, and that, I think, dwells on silence, reflection, contemplation. And then we have people who see our religious experience as participation. So they're much more active. Maybe there's a vocal response. Sometimes we've got applause, which disrupts the meditative side. I remember years ago when I was 12 years old, I used to sing. I was a boy soprano, and I sang in my county. They would call me, and I would sing everywhere. First off, it was just because it's a unique voice. But I was often asked to sing for revivals. And I was not a Southern Baptist or into that culture, but I gratefully accepted that call. And during there was the call and response. My job was to sing for the call to the altar, to have people come and accept Jesus at that moment. And I remember talking to my dad, because my dad was very much a devout, very stoic Presbyterian. And we were having basically a debate over the kitchen table. And he was a proponent of John Calvin. So if you've ever known anything about Calvinist predestination and the rigidity there, you can imagine the humorous situation of a 12-year-old boy debating my father on theology. But it was interesting. Rather than shooting me down, my father, I told him, I said, well, I can see that there's a certain passion that's there. And I see that that's a positive. I see that as a positive. My dad's going, no, that's just emotionalism. I'm like, well, what's, right? Sound familiar? So I'm like, well, who knows what the face of God is? And the best thing I learned there, even though my father and I fundamentally disagreed on this issue entirely, he was willing to listen to me, and he was willing to let me express myself. And right then, I knew he did that because he loved me. It was that simple. He was willing to allow me to express something that challenged him solely because he loved me. I think we have that opportunity right now. And then I am going to say it, the unknown thing, or the thing that we won't talk about, we're dealing with the issue of applause. We're dealing with people calling out during the service. And I recognize that it's just a different way of expressing the religious experience. So yes, there is the meditative side, which is silence and reflection and contemplation, and that's wonderful and that's great. And I also realize that there are people in the world who experience the presence of Christ in a very participative point. It's not just meditation. They feel the need for action, and they gain that experience there. Again, to me, I think if we're whoever we are and wherever you are, there's a place for you here, we need to accept those things. Now, that's not going to be easy. And I'll tell you, in my personal life, it's not easy. I know my wife was in here a little earlier, and she left. She's a coward. But I'm teasing. It's interesting. I am a very contemplative, quiet person. My personal preference in church is to have that quiet, serene presence. I love it when there's music, and then afterwards there's a silence to let it kind of savor and simmer over top of us. My wife, she's up whooping and hollering, and I have talked to her about this. It's been a while, because I have learned that that's probably not my best thing. And the reason I'm going to always support her is because I love her. I will definitely accept that because I love her. So, again, the secret to all this, you want to figure out how we can do these things to get us where we need to be and stay focused on our spiritual side. We're talking about finances, but I really believe the church as a spirit needs to focus on what makes us a church. If we do that, the money will take care of itself. It really will. Now, we have great minds. And many of them are sitting right over. We have great minds who are going to help that happen as far as getting the finances together. And all of you contribute to that. But again, I'm going to come back to that. You want to know the secret to all of this? Just get up in the morning and look in that mirror. That's the answer of who's going to fix it. Thank you.
Well, there we go. So I get to kind of play Phil Donahue here for questions. I wanted to touch really briefly, and first of all, I wanted to say thank you so much to Aaron. Thank you to Al. Also, just note the work of the Finance Committee and the Vestry. If you're on either the Finance Committee or the Vestry, can you just raise your hand? These people are working so hard. Also, Sally Howard, who has been working with Samantha Kramer, and also our Vestry Personnel Committee, which I know Chris Foltz is on, and Trula Worthy Clayton. Just thank you for all the work that you're doing. I wanted to briefly touch on two items that we hadn't talked about that are about what are we going to do with two major assets of the church? And always really want to look at, when we have an asset of the church, how do we use it best for the mission of the church? One of those assets is the house that Robin and I live in, is the rectory at 540 Woodland Road, which has been in the church family for quite a while. When I first got here and people asked me about it, I said, it's an asset of the church. We should look at it as that and decide what is the best use of it for the mission of the church. There is a team right now that is looking at that. Rachel Barker is chairing it. It also involves Lonnie Shield, Tim Hartley, who's an old friend from this congregation, got ordained out of this congregation, but is also a realtor who has sold houses in that neighborhood. Verna Zamora, Jeff Nickel, I'm on that. That group is really looking, everything's on the table with that, looking at that. And we'll be reporting and giving recommendations to the vestry no later than September, hopefully earlier than that. Just sort of a couple caveats with that, and there's, what we're looking for is, how is that best used for the overall mission of the church? In the past, and certainly in the present, I'm guaranteed, the rector is guaranteed housing in the agreement that brought us here, and so that's something that also has to be dealt with, and also just sort of in the future. I'm not going to be a rector here forever, and there'll be a new rector here, and especially with housing costs being what they are in Southern California, that will have something to do with the rectors that this church is able to achieve or to attract in the future. The other thing is, and I'm looking at Terry Knowles because she's on the Diocesan Standing Committee, Anytime a church decides it wants to sell property, it has to get permission of the diocese. And so if we could recommend to the vestry could accept the recommendation that the rectory be sold, that another piece of property be bought, or something else would happen. Anything involving that, it's part of our Episcopal polity, has to be approved by the diocese. So just to sort of let you know that if in any way we decide to divest ourselves of that property, we can make that decision, but we can't enact it without diocesan approval. Second thing is our parking lot, which is an incredible asset. It is an asset that is actually making income. I never thought the income from the parking lot would come back to where it was before COVID. And in fact, we estimated in our budgets that it wouldn't. And at least right now, it pretty much, as you said, Aaron, it's pretty much there, which is wonderful. I've had some people ask me if safe parking goes through, will that impact the income from the parking lot? The answer is no. The income from the safe parking program would be in hours that we are not renting out the parking lot. But another possibility is, do we want to do something with that land? And in response to the bishop's call for every congregation in the diocese to look at where we might put affordable housing on church property, we have a team also looking at that. Is that a possibility? Now, if we were going to do that with the parking lot, and this is where I love looking at multiple bottom lines. There's, of course, a financial bottom line. There's also a mission bottom line. And so we're looking at what fits both of those. We would need to make sure that whatever happened there, at minimum, we're able to replace the income we're getting there right now. And also, if we happen to lose parking, we'd have to figure out what we're doing with that. The bishop's goal is to have 25% of the churches in the diocese have affordable housing on there. Episcopal Communities and Services, which many people at All Saints Church are involved with, has hired a really amazing person, the Reverend Michael Bell, to be really the diocesan point person on this. So we're working with him. We have a great team that is taking a look at that. It includes Phil Necker, Erica Tamblin, Dorina Rodriguez, Robin Hughes, Risa Worthy-Deemer. I know I'm going to forget some people on that. But it's a really good team. We're working with Trinity Church Wall Street, which has not only excellent expertise on doing real estate development on church property, but also has a grant program where they will cover everything in the feasibility process, everything up to the point where you actually have a development partner. So we're working with them. We have a sort of exploratory team. We're going to be putting together a permanent team really based on Trinity Church guidelines. And again, this is just a study. No decisions have been made. And a big part of it is looking at the congregation and asking you, well, what do you feel God is calling us to do with this? Yes, from a financial standpoint and from a mission standpoint. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, and they don't need to be opposed to each other. We can find that sweet spot where the financial needs and health of the congregation meet the mission needs and health of the congregation. So wanted to put those two things out there. And now I want to turn it over to you. Are there questions, thoughts, just sort of anything you want to lay on the table? We got Don Miller back here.
Going back to, I think it was probably your second chart, but you don't need to pull it up. I believe in the last 5 years, we've lost about 400 family pledging units. And I'm wondering if any analysis has been done on, in that same 5-year period, how many new pledging units, family units, have come in. And then do we have any, this would be more, I guess, demographic analysis of the 400 who have left. And then finally, just rough calculations in my mind, when I divided the pledging amounts with the number of pledging families, if we factor in inflation, I think there's been a decline in the amount for each pledging unit. Anyway, that's just sort of a cluster of questions about the 400 units that we've lost, family units.
Right, so I'm gonna say again that I'm not the giving director. So Sarah is the one who has done the bulk of that kind of analysis and has been, and continues to do, to reach into the history and review the trends and try to figure out what stories tell us something. So, for example, she and I had a conversation about seeing a significant drop, and I think it was 2019, something like that, and talking about, did we understand, being newer than that to this community, do we have an understanding, who could we talk to understand, what had transpired maybe at that juncture. So what I would say is that these are good things I'll bring back to Sarah and make sure that we cover maybe more in depth. The numbers moving from, I think, something like 900 pledgers to in the 500 range, pledging households to the 500 range now. Those are net numbers, to your point, Dawn. So how many have we lost and how many have we gained is something we would need Sarah to give us more information on, because she does have those numbers. I just don't have them here with me today. The one more thing on that is to say that she did share with me that the average pledge for this year is $2,100, and I believe that you're correct. And it is common that the folks who are new pledgers do not tend to pledge, as much initially as you hope that they might in the future, whether by their commitment level to the church or their own, personal circumstance and family circumstances. So to the extent that we've had a significant turnover, maybe lost quite a few and gained quite a few of new, I don't think it would be surprising to see the average pledge go down, but we would prefer that trend to be reversed, yeah.
Yeah, and I also know there's members of the Giving Advisory Committee here, and Gloria, I don't know, is this something that you all have talked about at the Giving Advisory Group, or is there any sort of more insight into that you could offer? Or, here.
Well, one of the things we've done is kind of reconstituted a large group of lay members and reconstituted the giving committee, and we're at the beginning stages of that, but we're really looking at pulling in a lot more parishioners in the giving process, and obviously that hopefully will translate to more involvement overall in the church community. We are looking at numbers. We're still in process of that. I mean, over the years, there have been lots of different ways where we've categorized people as pledgers or non-pledgers, and people pledge one year, they don't pledge the next, but they give. So are they not pledgers, or are they pledgers? I mean, it's been a source of continuous confusion, and I'm working with Sarah and trying to get a handle on some of that as well. How do we communicate that? How do we name what a person is? And I think, to move more towards givers, whether they technically fall into being a pledger or whether they are regular givers of record, it's probably more important to start looking at that, but we're at the very beginning stages. And so we'll call on a lot of people to help us too. So,
Thank you very much. More questions here. Also, just if you're watching us and joining us online live, you can text your questions into 910 text ASC, 910 text ASC. That's 910-839-8272. Other questions? Ken here.
Just a clarification. You said last year there were people that gave in advance on their pledges. Was that spontaneous? Was it due to a plea? How did that occur? And do you see any of it going on this year?
Yeah, so what happens is Once the pledge campaign starts for the next year in the fall, whether that be September, October, November generally, some folks will decide to make their pledge and pay their pledge immediately, essentially, for the subsequent year. And those pledges are treated in the accounting record as belonging as income to that subsequent year's operating budget. So we sort of set them aside and record them as income to the year that they were intended to support. So it's common in churches generally and at All Saints specifically for there to be prepaid pledging, just people who choose to give in advance of the year that they're intending to support. Where I have seen over the last decade of my work in the church is that the biggest swings within one church in regard to how much prepaid pledging you get has to do with the stock market, where people are deciding whether or not to take advantage of how the market's doing and their own charitable contribution, tax impacts, that kind of thing can be factors. So it can be very specific to individual families. And in the case of All Saints, the last few years, there have been some fairly significantly sized pledges that were prepaid, and so just a couple of people deciding not to make those prepayments creates a relatively material change to our prepaid pledging. Yeah, so the folks who we know who have prepaid their pledges in prior years, and those pledges were fairly significant to the operating budget, have still pledged for 2024. So they don't represent lost income, just timing differences.
Others? Don Miller. While I'm walking back to Don, I'll just give a little update on filming income, which is exciting. The industry, and many of you may be involved in the industry or know something about it, it really is trying to find its footing after the strikes and figure out what the budgets are going to be. We've had 3 visits from location scouts. Don, you don't know. I'll come to you. I'll come to you. We've had 3 visits of location scouts. It resulted in 1 location shoot, which was this past weekend, which was $35,000 for us. And it was for an HBO Max show that potentially could be repeat business. Really want to give a big shout out to Veronica Flores, who's the head of our film office, to Verna Zamora, who's the head of Building and Grounds, to our entire Building and Grounds staff. It's a lot of work when we have filming here, and they do an amazing job. Our hope is to have sort of, once a quarter, to have a major shoot like that, and we do that, we'll make our budget and then some. And so, but we're also working with the city of Pasadena to try to remove some of the barriers that we have heard to filming here, because we've been listening to location scouts and showrunners, and they've said, there's things about Pasadena that are just kind of a pain, and they're going to Sierra Madre and Altadena and places instead. So we're in conversation both with our representative on the city council, but also with the city of Pasadena film office. And as you are in the business, if you know of anyone who's looking for a location, and it doesn't have to be a church. This weekend we were transformed into a college campus. Actually, the first 2 seasons of the show were shot at Vassar, and it's gotten too expensive for them to shoot outside of LA. So they looked at our campus, much as the people did with Legally Blonde, and said, this could look like a college campus. And we got $35,000 out of it, and it was great to work with them. So anything like that, tell people, hey, I've got this great church. There's a page on the website for the film office that it can look at it in depth. And Veronica Flores will meet with them anytime to get the business here. So please spread the word about that. And now Don, here.
I came to All Saints in the early 80s. The vigor and the outreach and the activism was caught in a lot of people, but one of them was Marty Coleman. And I see is it a designated fund? And what are the Marty Coleman funds going for? And I didn't know we had 50 designated funds of different things. I'm curious about that and how people give for something. For instance, if my money went into the Marty Coleman fund, and that were not coming into the church budget. What does that do? Yet I believe so strongly in what the church stood for through the eyes of Marty Coleman. So it's an interesting conundrum for us.
Okay, I won't speak to the 50, I'll let you do that, but I'll talk about the Marty Coleman Fund. This was the request of Marty's family, and if you didn't know Marty Coleman, I'm so sorry, because Marty was just one of the best people you could have ever met. Marty was a force for love and joy and justice, and somewhere in the universe she still is. And she, her family wanted to honor her specifically. And this is we've talked about restricted gifts. This is something that happens. They said they wanted to set up the Marty Coleman Peace and Justice Fund, so people could donate to that money, to that fund, and the funds would be used to continue her vision of the church being active in peace and justice concerns. So the money for that, we have a Peace and Justice Vestry Committee. The Peace and Justice Vestry Committee can make requests for that fund. It would have to be determined that they are in line with the restrictions of the fund as they were given. So like if the Peace and Justice Vestry Committee said, we all want to go to Cabo for a weekend, let's use the Marty Coleman Fund, the answer would be, no, you can't do that. But like, for example, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but one person said, you know what, I'd love to, there's some really amazing justice films being made right now, and what if we did a screening of one or two of them at All Saints? And that's what Marty did with something called Conscientious Projector that some of you might have met. And we thought, well, that might actually be a really good use of those funds because it continues in the spirit of something that was important to Marty. And so your question about the accountability of that is the Peace and Justice Vestry Committee, which Loren Young is the chair of, would have to make a proposal about that. And then it would have to go through what we have an amazing internal financial accountability team. And part of what they do is they make sure that any expenditures are spent where they're supposed to be. So if there are restrictions on something, then any expenditures out of that is within the restriction, because we never want to violate donor intent here at All Saints Church. So we don't take money. There's a music program discretionary fund. We don't take money out of that and fix the roof, because that does not honor donor intent. So does that answer your question, Don? Great. And then the 50 funds, do you want to, that's like 50 ways to leave your lover, isn't it? So
Or something like that, yeah.
slip out the back, Jack? Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's, that's actually kind of a small number for how big All Saints is, if I'm being honest. I have a church client that's half that size and has twice as many restricted funds, to my chagrin. So, it's because they're not challenging to manage, but just kind of a part of added complexity to the financial picture for people inside and outside. We have a little bit of money, for example, in a Black Lives Matter fund that was, kind of collected back when in 2020. A little bit of money for the foster care project. The music department has a number of funds. The music discretionary fund that Mike was just commenting on. Each of our adult choirs has a fund for their use. There's a music exploratory fund that a major donor funded for some ideas of launching some new music programs. The funds range from about less than $1,000 to maybe more than $100,000. The other thing that we do have as well is there are some resources left over in a fund from the capital campaign that happened a number of years ago. So that, for example, is another fund. And then we do have 5 endowed funds, which are funds where the original donations are not spent, but they're invested so that the earnings on those funds can be spent for the mission of the church. So those are some examples. Happy to get you a whole list. Or there's actually a couple of pages in the monthly financials. So if you could grab those from the website or from a vestry member, or if you let us know if you'd like a copy, you can look at all the funds and their balances.
Great. Hold on, stay up there because we have a question or two that's been texted in. The first is, does the pledge goal of $2.9 million include the weekly giving monies? And that may have been about the reclassification. That's the problem with the text, is I can't get more.
So the question from text is does the pledge goal include the weekly giving monies? And I would assume that means in services.
Right.
And so I think the clarifying piece would be to say, if you put a check in the plate on a weekly basis and you have made a pledge, your check is treated as a pledge. And so, yes, that pledge goal would include that. Or if you send in a check from your bank and you have a pledge, it will be treated as a pledge. The one thing, just because I was just reflecting with Walter about this earlier and with Sarah earlier the last couple of weeks, we have not at this point aligned those buckets of giving, offering versus pledge in the proposed budget with this new definition of how we're doing it. So as I explained, at one point, 2.9 million, 4 million that we think we're going to come to is our pledges we currently have, plus pledges we're anticipating, plus additional giving that we don't expect to may not be pledged, but is recurring giving that's ongoing. So one thing I will say is when we get to the end of this year, Vestry and others who look at the financials may see, because we're doing this reclassification, that offering line is more and that pledge giving is less, because we may have flip-flopped a classification in budget and actual in terms of how we're recording them. But this would be the only year that would be impacted because we're sort of doing all of these shifts all at once. And I can confirm that in the projected budget or the proposed budget, there's no double counting in those buckets. I am confident about that. So hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, I hope so too. Then the other one was, would it be better to pledge all rather than give weekly as well? And what I would say, best thing to do is to do both. Make a large pledge and then additional giving on top of that. But really, if you can make a pledge. It helps us in our planning. Frankly, the earlier you can fulfill your pledge, if you're someone that you can, I was just having this conversation with one of our members a couple weeks ago, and she said, well, when would it be good for me to give this to you? Because this person's on a fixed income, they know they have the money. And I'm just like, as soon as possible, it would be great. And so if you actually, looking at that chart that Aaron showed you, if you can front load your giving that you've already pledged, that's wonderful. And if you also, and there's a lot of you I know who do this, you make your pledge, and then you also throw in something during the week, and that's great. And again, if you come into some additional money, please consider tithing a portion of that, giving a portion of that to the church. We've had wonderful, really moving stories of parishioners, not just who get major gifts, but someone who just sort of like, I came into $100 more, here's 10. And it just is like, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. And so I would sort of say, any way you can give, that's great. And again, as I said in the service this morning, we're having more and more people who are part of our community who don't have a salaried income, who are working multiple jobs, who are hourly workers, and they have to estimate. There's many of us who have to estimate what our income is going to be every year, and that might make us nervous in pledging. And so what I say is, always just do the same thing. Say your prayers, have the conversations you need to have, pledge what God puts on your heart. If something happens and you can't meet your pledge, let's talk. I was talking to one person today, and it's like, you may be in a season of your life where you need to receive more than you give. We all have different seasons. And at the same time, if you find you can exceed your pledge, let's talk about that too. Because that's also how we are able to help and really stand with those in our community who might all of a sudden be in a rough financial place that they didn't have any idea that we could do. We had this happen a lot during the SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild strike. Where it wasn't just that people said, I can't fulfill my pledge, and we were like, we understand. We had people that we were, fortunately, because of the generosity of this community, we were actively able to keep them from being homeless during the strike. We were able to help replace a car that someone needed to. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get to work or after the strike happened to an audition. That's who we are as a church, is to do that for each other. And so if you are in a position to give more, please, please, please do. and know and trust that your gift is going to be so well stewarded and taken care of. So thank you. I think we have time for one more, but then a bunch of us, we're going to hang out here for a while after. Are you raising your hand? Okay. Robin, I believe, right?
Hi, I'm Robin Kinman. I've been a member here for 7 years. My question is about, I'm thinking about, wow, 100 years of All Saints in this building. That's amazing. And looking forward to demographics, knowing that the next generations don't have the income that this generation that really built the church in the last couple decades. So my question is about how are we looking at perhaps moving away from the pledge giving foundation of our operating funds? Are we looking at like moving away from what I consider like a panhandling model, like please give us money, because I don't see that sustainable. So is there some creativity happening? Are we thinking about the next 100 years and recognizing people like me and younger? We're not going to pledge. We're like, it's not coming. What are we doing? Don't let this die.
Yeah, so I said this to somebody this morning. I think it was out in the courtyard. Sarah had shared with me that she had gone to a conference in Texas earlier this spring, and talked with some people in one of the workshops about, sort of partially this question of sort of what are we going to do? How do we react to the moment we're in? And what we're seeing, not only I think the demographic trends that you're talking about in terms of the amount of wealth that people in younger generations have, I think our other challenge in the church is the trust in institutions, right? So who are we as an institution, and how do you continue to attract people who want to be part of that institution? And so now I'm way over my skis now, friends. The way I think about it is, is that what we know about younger generations is that they're more interested in funding or helping with things, potentially more volunteerism than giving money, right? So how do we secure the buildings if we choose to continue to be a place that is church as place, right? Which that may not be as common in 20 or 30 or 40 years. Church, the Christian church may revert back to historical times, right? Meeting in living rooms and that sort of thing. But those places that we have that are really historical, and important places, and I think we all in this room may feel that All Saints is one of those places. How do we sustain these buildings? And I know Mike has said it before, but endowing the building endowment, so you have ongoing investments that we can draw from to help us pay for those operating expenses of maintaining the buildings, and building up reserves in order to sustain that, so that we can respond to the folks who are wanting to be engaged, wanting to give, but they want to be sure that their dollars and their efforts are going to the mission that they're interested in supporting. So that would be my answer, is I think we're going to move to more diversified non-member income, and we're going to get sort of more comfortable with how to really compartmentalize income in a way that speaks to what people are interested in participating in, if that makes sense, kind of.
Thank you all. I want to say a special thank you to Chad and Jose Luis. Keith is on the transformational journey in Japan, and you all have stepped in both for the forum and for the service and for this to do the live streaming, and you're probably doing the children and youth choirs tonight. So just thank you. And that really is, again, that's the power of, Alfredo always reminds me not to call it volunteerism, but baptismal ministry in the church. And we have so many people who give not only your money, but your time. So thank you all. And if you've ever wondered, wow, what it would be like to film things and be a part of that crew, talk to one of them, talk to Keith, talk to Stu Rosen, who is also doing an amazing job with that. A bunch of us, we're going to hang out here for a while if you have more questions. Thank you to those of us who have been watching and participating online. And have a wonderful time, but don't go too far. 5 o'clock, please be back here for the Children and Youth Choir's concert. It's going to be fantastic. God bless you all.